concluding panel of Daksha Conclave. Before we get to the panel and its themes, I would just like to do a quick thank you, because usually what happens is all of us get very tired by the end of the panel. But I have a few people who have really worked in the background to thank. So allow me to take a few minutes to just thank our team. Let me begin with Suraj Chhatri, our security personnel, who for the last 3 to 5 days has really been up very late and kept the office open, and this year on a Sunday. So special gratitude to him. There are a lot of folks from the academic affairs, admissions, marketing, uh, teaching assistant, and TA interns who have really put in a lot of effort to ensure that the conclave has shaped up the way it indeed has over the last 3 days. Let me name all of them here: Angel Mary, Sheetal Mary, Shanton Datta, Ranjit M, Filza Belal, Swastik Sharma, Anupriya Dhonchak, Sahib Noor Singh, Ridhiman Sarkar, Nelayapan, Kriti Singh, Anusha Surendran, and Nalin Bakle. Our professional development committee, which is a group of Daksha fellows who have put in special effort to hit the ground up and running as far as the conclave goes. Uh, Vasishtan P, Mridul Gupta, Tushar Bell, and Abhishek Yadav. I owe a lot to you guys for having taken this effort. Of course, all the faculty and visiting faculty at Daksha who have, in more ways than one, put in a lot of time and effort to ensure that the student presentations and all the background work is proper, and has really helped us put together a very good conclave. Finally, of course, all panelists. Over the last 3 days, including this panel, we have hosted 36 experts from across industry and policy. And I'm deeply grateful to each of you for having taken the time out for our students. The Vice Chancellor and our advisory board have guided us from the very beginning. As some of you know, and many of you may not, Daksha Fellowship is under the larger aegis of the Sai University, which is a greenfield university coming up in Chennai. So Dr. Jamshed Barucha, our founding Vice Chancellor, and Mr. K.V. Ramani, the Chancellor of the university, whose guiding vision has helped us build the fellowship in this manner. I'm deeply grateful to both of them to help us make all of this happen. So welcome you all to this panel. Let me just check in with our fourth panelist, Anirudh. He says he is just joining. Sure. So over the last 3 days, we've had very interesting conversations around technology, regulation, and disputes resolution. In particular, on matters of technology, we began the conclave with an inaugural panel on data protection, which was chaired by Malavika Raghavan, visiting faculty at Daksha Fellowship. And there we delved into questions around non-personal data. Students had presented on various aspects of regulation of non-personal data. Similarly, the inaugural day also saw a panel on 5G and what needs to be done, where we stand on telecom regulations, particularly in the context of 5G technology. Again, Nikhil Narendran, who's visiting faculty at Daksha Fellowship, had moderated that panel, and students had done an excellent coverage of various regulatory issues involved there. Yesterday, we had a panel on competition in the digital economy, particularly looking at tech giants and the various competition law and policy related issues. And finally, here we are to look at emerging technologies, regulatory principles, and values. And one may really wonder, after hearing about data, about 5G or the telecom backend, and of course about competition, what else is left? And there I think I'd go back to some of the other conversations that we saw yesterday and day before about energy, about financial regulation that happened today morning. In all these conversations, there are many themes that kept coming up. There are themes around competition, of course. There are themes around consumer safety and protection. There are themes around innovation. And somewhere we felt the need to have a panel that really looks at all these multiple themes, particularly from the context of a subject matter that is unknown in many ways, and that unknown is emerging technologies. I mean, while we do know broadly that there are some of these technologies out there, and there is this very businessy term called Industry 4.0 that we use quite liberally to denote all these technologies. The truth of the matter is, we none of us here, I think, are really able to say that this is where the world is headed. Maybe Rahul is best placed because he's an investor and has put in a lot of time thinking about, where the puck is going to be rather than where the puck is. But even to someone like Rahul, I'm sure there are a lot of uncertainties on where we are really going to be in another 10 years, and there are multiple versions of this utopia or dystopia that are presented depending on which perspective that you bring to the table. So we have a very interesting panel today to look at all of this. Let me begin with introducing Astha Kapoor. Astha is the co-founder of Apti Institute, a public research institute based out of Bangalore, which examines the intersection of technology and society. Astha works on data governance and stewardship and is currently building something called the Data Economy Lab. So welcome, Astha, and Astha will bring to the table the perspective of a policy researcher who is also closely engaged with practitioners of technology. Uh, the next up is Anirudh Rastogi. He's the managing partner at Ikigai Law. Anirudh has been involved with various, cutting edge technologies, particularly when it comes to advising startups. Ikigai Law, as many of us here know, is an award winning law and policy firm based out of New Delhi, which specializes in representing technology businesses. Anirudh is an alum of Harvard Law School, and he's also a visiting faculty at IIM Indore and NLU Delhi. Uh, we have Kaushik Moitra next with us. He's a partner with Barucha and Partners in New Delhi. He advises international and domestic clients on mandates ranging across policy advisory, compliance and regulations, and media and technology related documentation, including licensing, distribution, and revenue sharing agreements. He is also closely engaged with the entrepreneurship and startup practice of the firm. Kaushik previously was a partner with TMT Law Practices, one of the earliest boutique law firms in the country looking at tech, media, and telecom areas of practice, and of course, started his career with the Bennett Coleman Group. Finally, we have Rahul Bhargavaj. Rahul is the co founder and COO of Jungly Games. As a pioneer in the Indian gaming space with over 25 million users, Jungly Games is the fastest growing skill games company and was the first to launch skill games for cash prizes. Their best known games include Jungly Rummy, fantasy sports app Houseat, Jungly Teen Patti, and EatMe.io. A serial entrepreneur and active investor, Rahul is also general partner at Owl Capital and a board member of multiple companies. So, welcome all of you to this discussion. The format of this panel is that we will have a discussion with the experts on the panel for about an hour on various themes relating to regulation of emerging technologies, which covers the why of regulation, the how, and the who must be regulating set of questions. And then we have a presentation by Daksha Fellows. They have worked on regulation of cryptocurrencies, and we will have a final segment on feedback for fellows on their presentation, as well as general Q&A from the audience, which largely consists of Daksha Fellows. So, Asa, if we could just begin with you, since you're a policy researcher who's looking at technology and society related questions. The very theme of this panel is regulatory values and principles, right? And if I could recall Jim Watson at this point, when the whole set of conversations around DNA and gene editing was going on, right, back in the day in the late 70s. He thundered in a meeting of scientists, I'm told, if we do not go there, who else will? Right. And that, in some sense, is the innovator's credo, right? The spirit of innovation, to say that, we really need to stretch the goalpost. And that is the whole idea behind humankind being taught science, right? And practicing science and, of course, technology, right? But at the same time, we have over the last, decades, and particularly over the last few years, seen a spurt in the kind of hazards that the explosion of the digital economy has presented to us, right? Whether it's, artificial intelligence and deep mining and all of that. What we are really seeing in many ways is, the rise of fake information, more data profiling, all kinds of physical threats on account of the rise of cyber physical systems like drones, Alternate currencies, which are of course decentralized often by nature, can build a certain element of trust, but which too have their own set of concerns, right? Some of it real and some imaginary too. So in the context of all of this, how have you seen your work evolve, right? I mean, in many ways you have been part of that journey as the country has progressed, digital India, and many of us, right? I mean, I came back in 2016 while on a break from my PhD, and I mean, so is the story with, I'm sure, Anirudh and some of us on the panel. So having seen this whole evolution, like why do you think there is a need to regulate from a more abstract perspective when it comes to emerging technologies?
Thank you so much, Anant, and thank you so much for having me here on this super exciting panel. I mean, I think that, like you said, I think that this tussle on regulating emerging technology is largely, we don't know what the risks are until the technologies are further developed, and so there's a tussle between the need to regulate and this need to also give people the space to innovate, and also and I think you had written this at one point, is that there's a competitive advantage that also comes with a country like India, that it allows its private sector to innovate on questions of technology. But at the same time, I think that as we have learned, like you said, and it's been a quick and sharp learning curve for everybody in the last about 10 years, in that there are a lot of concerns. Harms of technology are real. There's privacy concerns, exclusion, bias, and the traditional regulatory structures that we have so far are potentially quite complex. They're fragmented. They adjust slowly to existing circumstances, and there are lots of public agencies with overlapping authorities. So while acknowledging that there is a need to regulate emerging tech, the question of when is the right time to do it such that you don't stifle innovation but at the same time prevent harm is a big question. And then also the next is how. And I think in the context of India, we have a few examples of where it's been done well, but largely, I think in a country where we live without a Data Protection Act, I think that our ability to swiftly regulate is definitely something that we need to consider. So I think that broadly, that tussle is what is going to define the emerging technology. And like you said, this is an unknown for all of us. We don't know what the right answers are. And as a result of that, I think that there needs to be a principle-based approach to this emerging technology regulation, where we think about what the sort of high-level anchors for regulation need, and not just for regulation, but I also think that the process of regulation itself needs to be something that we need to consider. But broadly, I think that there are a few things that any regulation should be hinged on. One is, of course, safeguarding people, individual society from any potential harms. And so I think that that is the first step in all of this, is to take a clear rights-based approach to thinking about regulation. The second, of course, is it any regulation should give space to the promotion of responsible innovation and competition, which I also think that is an area that we need to think more reasonably about. And then the last one, which I think is less clear in my head, but also to be able to think about the parameters of the business model, because I think that the business model for emerging technology is quite complex and it changes, and and it's something that becomes it it becomes hard to assign responsibility, like in the case of Uber, which says that, oh, work, drivers are not core to our business. Then how do you think about regulating it from a labor perspective? So I think that those questions make regulation of emerging technology more complex, but I think that there is a need to evolve reasonable principles around the business model as well, which concerns privacy, which concerns labor, which concerns data. So I think that to me would be the broad parameters under which certain regulations on emerging technology should emerge. And then beyond that, I think that we need to take, as I said, a sort of innovative and iterative approach to the process of developing these regulations. So can we use policy labs, regulatory sandboxes? I know that the regulatory sandbox thing has been coming up, but RBI keeps talking about it in the context of fintech. Karnataka was supposed to pass a law. I think Vidhi was working on it to have regulatory sandboxes, but we haven't necessarily seen that. And I think that those sort of innovative mechanisms to develop regulations can help us evolve best practices, can guide things a little bit better and give us the opportunity to be self-reflexive, to be flexible, and also test out ideas before they become hard laws, which I think is again something that we need to evolve. The other thing is, I think that we need to make sure that we are doing this in a collaborative and consultative way. I think that so far the process of developing regulations, I mean, we saw this with Sri Krishna, we're seeing this with NPD as well. I think TRI obviously has done slightly better on the process part of this, but I think that how can we be consultative? How can we be transparent? How can we be iterative in the process of developing regulation is also something that we need to consider more deeply, and that should be embedded in the principles that we evolve for this. And then I think that finally, I think that the ability to go back and make sure that, and again, I'm borrowing this from your work, is to constantly do a rights assessment of any regulation that is passed, and to do it periodically, I think is critical, because I think that, and we know this, as technology moves fast, their regulation sometimes is insufficient. So how do we make sure that, again, this is codified? Because at the heart of every regulation needs to be a certain the approach of risk or harm to society, I think, needs to be core to any regulation. I also think that, I mean, and again, you pointed this to me in the sort of like notes you sent as part of the panel, but also I think that Lessig's point on his 4-point modalities on code architecture as the first part, which is the physical or technical constraints on activity, such as, I mean, he gives the example of locks on doors, or markets, which are the economic forces, or law, which is the explicit mandate, and norms, which is the social conventions or sanctions that are evolved. I think that I think that this is a useful frame, but I think in the context of regulating emerging technologies, I wonder whether the speed of each of these is similar and whether they can be applied. So I think that, unfortunately, and this has been said many times, that the code or the architecture becomes the way to regulate, which gives, of course, undue power to the technology companies and needs to be considered, because law and norms take time to evolve, and as a result of that are not perhaps the most immediate and most efficient ways of regulating emerging technology. And so a lot of the burden, in a certain way, is on the technology companies themselves, and we're seeing that increasingly, whether it's the problematic oversight board, or whether we see questions of deplatformization. A lot of it is happening through the tech companies, and that's also something to think about, which again brings you back to the question of whether standards are the first inroad into developing a certain kind, or starting off the conversation on regulation. And then, of course, that opens up the question of who develops these standards. I think that there are a lot of there's some recent writing on technical support organizations. I think that with the digital public infrastructure conversation, this new entity, which is, I think, from what I understand, public and private collaborative entity that is that develops standards. I think that may be the initial set of, or sort of the initial inroad into regulation. And I think that, which again we've seen a little bit of the self-regulation, which again try is experimenting with on the cloud stuff, but I think is also an interesting idea, because if it's going to be an industry-led practice of regulation, I think that the idea of self-regulation and showing trust between the government as well as the private sector is critical. So I think that that is an interesting way of thinking about it. And I think that applying this sort of lessic framework, and I've seen some work around, different types of technologies. So body cameras in Sweden, you realize that standards is what sort of leads the way in areas which are new, which are emerging, which where no. And I think that after that there's the norms question that comes in, because are people then evolving practices around that. So I'll pause there before and see if that makes
Right.
sense.
So I've just got one follow-up, point there. I mean, I really appreciate that you brought up the Lessig framing, and we had a, email exchange over that. And the one thing that I found very interesting about the Lessig framing is the time when it was written. Right. We did not have this whole idea of a technocratic state,
Mhm.
and that I think changes a lot of things, right? Because today you have a state that is invested one way or the other in biometric technologies, in facial recognition. I don't mean the Indian state, I mean states across. I mean the whole idea of a technocratic governance regime, right? And this takes me to that question of how independent is regulation going to be, right? Everybody likes to sort of make Facebook or Google or whoever else the bad boys of regulation, right? And say that you're not self-regulating enough, or you're really pushing self-regulation in a direction that suits your business interest. And I often wonder, can't the same accusation be leveled against that idea of a technocratic state? Maybe not business interest, but certainly certain values that it would like to promote, right? So as someone working at the intersection of technology and society, how do you perceive the potential of any kind of independent standards or regulation in a world where both the states and your huge technology companies are heavily invested, of course in very different ways, maybe, in the outcome of certain technology values being permeated
Mhm.
through different kinds of emerging tech models?
Yeah, so I mean that's a complex one, and it's something definitely that we've been trying to wrap our heads around, particularly because one of the new sort of ideas that we've been following closely is the NPD, right? In the non-personal data committee report, even the second one, the kind of access the state is giving, it's the same with the PDP. It's becoming the state is very clearly a player, and and is in a position to regulate technology, but or technology firms, but also give itself a certain a certain preference in all of this. My personal and perhaps incorrect notion or solution to that in some ways, and another thing that we've been working on, and it's not really related to regulation, but is a question of how do we involve communities of individuals in these processes. And we've been seeing that in some part. So I'll give you an example, right? GDPR allows for data portability. So there are groups of Uber drivers that are now, tussling with the courts, trying to tell that we need ownership over our data, because Uber doesn't share it with us, and therefore we have no transparency in terms of how our data is used. So I think that there are ways in which to also bring people to be a part of this conversation more critically, and also then develop structures, whether it's in the form of ideas like data unions or stewardship or cooperatives. Trust is another idea that's being tussled with again a little bit, on how do we involve people to also maintain that degree of accountability, whether it's in your relationship with the state or whether it's in your relationship with the private sector. So some kind of independent governance, because I do not think, and I agree with you, I don't think that the state is a responsible player in all of this at all, particularly in the context of India. But I think that there are sort of modalities through which we can at least aim to hold players in the digital economy, whether it's the private sector or the state, accountable through a more sort of bottom up approach. And that, of course, is a long fight. And I don't imagine, but I think that we need to start creating the space to do that in existing regulations. And NPD makes some sort of a reference to that when it talks about data trusts. But again, I think that's an idea that's going to take another 5 or 10 years to evolve.
Right, right. So Anirudh, just taking on from that point about various substantive and processual ways in which we could improve regulation of emerging tech. You're someone who's seen the landscape on many fronts, right? I mean, cryptocurrencies, drones, the gaming industry, but in particular, I'm very curious about the drones story, because I mean, it's a genuinely fascinating story, right? I mean, Recently in class, we were discussing this piece by Susan Osterman that looks at regulatory pragmatism by the Indian Supreme Court, and says that bans are often used by the Supreme Court to begin a conversation, right? And in some sense, when I was reading that, I was thinking about drones, because with drones, it was not the Supreme Court. We had instead the ministries involved, including and the Director General of Civil Aviation. But the interesting thing is that we began with a ban, and now we end up, I wouldn't say with a bang, but somewhere close to, I think, having a good set of regulations in place, with of course all attendant practical difficulties, I'm sure, which you are better placed to speak on. But how have you really seen that whole journey? Do you think it was really the starting point of as a conversation, or was it just a very knee jerk response? And then how did we get to where we are now? And your whole experience, we'd like to hear a little more about that story. Sorry,
Sure,
Ankur.
Anand, thank you. Thanks for that opportunity, because I mean, this subject is very close to my heart, and something that I've engaged with for over the last 5 to 6 years now. I definitely think that it was certainly this so-called the circular which kind of imposed a ban on use of drones. It wasn't really worded as a ban, by the way. All the circular said was very innocuously, it said that, well, if you want to fly a drone, take an approval from, well, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, from the DGCA, from the Airports Authority, from the local police, from the defense, which essentially means, and by the way, it ended with saying, and other concerned security agencies, right? So essentially what that meant was that you would never get that approval. And so it was a de facto ban. And this is a story we've seen, by the way, play out across multiple different technology sectors, right? I mean, even and I think the reason why we often find ourselves in that situation is because it is convenient for the regulator. When it comes to emerging technology, which you don't understand, the risk and potential of which you cannot really measure with certainty, regulation is often far harder than banning. And there too, a clear ban is always open to challenge. So you come up, you approach it with something like this, right, which is kind of couched as not being a ban, but it really is in effect. It was knee jerk because we also I mean, I can tell you this anecdotally, that many of these agencies that were named in that circular that were supposed to give you approvals did not really know that they were supposed to grant an approval. So there was no process in place whatsoever, right? So so it was knee jerk, and it was really prompted by a number of media reports which suddenly riled up the DGCA into thinking that, hey, this whole thing emerging where people want to deliver pizzas using drones, and we don't know how to regulate it. There's no law for this. What do? Let's ban it until there is kind of precedence elsewhere in the world that we can follow, etc. Now that approach also becomes very problematic in current environment with the where interestingly, I mean, this is a good place as well, where the government of the day is not necessarily looking at standards or models that have been successfully implemented elsewhere. They want to try out. They're more confident in trying out their own models, and which is where so this whole thing starts getting murky. On one hand, the regulator took a stance in drones saying that, well, we'll wait and watch how the EU, for example, chooses to regulate over a period of time. We'll follow that. But then all of a sudden they start saying, do we really need to? Right? I mean, why can't we innovate and invent our own models? And what we have today, by the way, is a very ambitious kind of regulatory approach, which has been an utter failure, because even today, by the way, you cannot really, I mean, things have just begun to change, I think, in the last maybe 6 to 12 months. But honestly, flying a drone is still a very problematic kind of task. So that is where we are. But um, this entire journey of regulation of drones was an exercise in achieving consensus between the multiple stakeholders. And that's again another theme that we're seeing across all the emerging technology sectors. So when you start looking at these kind of foundational technologies, they typically cut across multiple sector segments, and therefore multiple ministries and departments and regulators get involved, right? So cryptocurrency, for instance, I mean, there is, the Ministry of Finance is concerned, but so is, your home, and, from a security standpoint, you have other concerns and all of that. Drones, again, we had, I just named a few, right? So the Airports Authority to the MHA to, defense and whatnot. So this is always, I mean, any regulatory approach has to be achieved with consensus between all these different regulators. And that becomes a very, very hard task. Right. So I think that is what really complicated the whole drones kind of, kind of the regulatory narrative in this space. So yeah, these are some of the themes that I have kind of seen, which make this subject really complicated. But one kind of last thing that I would like to say is that, the government in why kind of the drone story is actually is a classic, is a failure, is because the government wanted a perfect regulatory approach, right? They wanted to have a perfect enforcement mechanism with zero risk tolerance. So they kept debating on how is it that we can really make sure that not a single drone can fly illegally, which is obviously which is not possible. It is also not possible in an emerging technology area where technology is evolving. So you can't fathom all risks possible. And I think so. It's very important to have a slightly higher than zero risk tolerance, to be open to an iterative process where you can experiment, take smaller regulatory risks, right? Allow some limited lower risk activities, say open up test sites for flying, allow your PSUs at least to fly within their own industrial complexes, et cetera, et cetera. Because until and unless you are open to experiment from a regulatory standpoint also, you're not creating a learning, a feedback loop, right? So how do you really, I mean, you cannot really, without experimentation, you cannot achieve a perfect regulatory approach. And what they finally tried to do, which actually is, as I said, an extremely ambitious regulatory approach, turned out to be a complete failure because you've never experimented with it before, right? So it's been 2 years since we have had the Digital Sky kind of platform, the idea in the play, but we have not been able to implement it so far. I'm happy to, I mean, I don't think, I'm not sure if the audience wants to go into details of what the Digital Sky is, etc. But it's not been a successful, as big a success as it it was meant to be when it was.
No, so in fact, I would like to probe on the Digital Sky a little further, just because to me that kind of represents a signpost, right, in terms of Indian regulatory approach. That the factor that Lessig highlights, right, the code element to me is really I mean, or rather, when you look at Digital Sky, that code element is writ large in the Digital Sky, a model or thinking, right? And of course, one is that we had never experimented with it, right? But somewhere on the face of it, it looks like a rather revolutionary approach, right? So from coming from an Indian regulator, to me, when it came out in 2018, I was quite amazed, to be honest. And what was the motivating factor for us to think a little out of the box with something like integrating code into regulation? But then what really happened on account of various reasons, that it has not resulted in the intended outcome? I mean, both would be interesting questions, I think, to probe a little bit.
Sure. So let me just go back in time a little bit and just give, kind of lay out the narrative here. So you had the de facto ban by way of a circular. Then there was, for the next 2 years, the government did not do anything on this subject because they were in a comfortable position now, right? You banned it. There is no, if there's any kind of drone flying, it's illegal, so it's not on us, right? Then there was industry pressure. There was pressure possibly even from the PMO and from various kind of industry associations. So they came up with a draft regulation, which went in for public consultation. But when they started the consultation, they found that there's no consensus between the MHA defense and the MOCA, because the MHA was very, very rigid about this. There's something too dangerous for us to open up. We don't want to mess with it. So finally, and this kind of went on, this debate went on for three odd years, right? Without any consensus. So you needed something really revolutionary to get everybody on page, to get everybody comfortable with the idea that drones can fly in the country. And Digital Sky was really that, right? So Digital Sky, in short, is an electronic, think of it as a license, an electronic permission granted not to a human being but to the machine itself. So the machine will not fly until it has a license. So in effect, you are certain of, enforcement. Essentially, you have incredible power over agency to enforce. Essentially, what you miss out, of course, is like somebody who wants to fly a militarized drone is not going to, in any case, put in the right kind of hardware which enables you to control it. So illegal activity will continue irrespective, and I think that's the unfortunate bit that regulators sometimes overlook. But so that was the origin of the digital sky, and that is what finally got everybody, all these different stakeholders, comfortable with the idea of allowing drone activity in the country. Right now, the thing is that you do have a policy in place, which is now, it's 2 years since we have that policy document in place. But to really, build out this technology which can operate at scale and securely and is interoperable with your manned your manned traffic systems and whatnot, is a mammoth task, and we have not even been able to pilot it yet. Right, so we are still at it took us a long time to tender it, and the tender got cancelled, then you had to reissue the tender, then an agency in the US picked it up, which then they kind of so it's been a mess, and it's still in development. Right, and as a result of which, now the regulators had the perfect excuse. They said that, well, it's not that we are not implementing the policy. You have to secure, you obtain a license through Digital Sky, right? But Digital Sky in effect is not ready, so you can't really do anything about it. Right, so, and this is the same kind of situation that we are going to see play out in the cryptocurrency space as well. So the current the draft bill that is likely to be tabled talks about banning private currencies, so-called private currencies, and introducing a government cryptocurrency, right? Which, by the way, is going to take us 4 years to architect, tender out, build out, do a pilot. And by that time, technology would have evolved, and you are left with a system that probably is already late in terms of its, 4 years hence, it will definitely not be in line with where private technology is going to be. Yeah. So I think the ambition that we this ambition and or regulatory ambition is something which I mean it sounds great. It really, we were all very excited when Digital Sky was first kind of being talked about, but we have to implement it with a lot of caution, and these are just lessons that are being learned as we play with this.
Right, absolutely. No, I mean, this is, I think one of those areas where I think if we had, gone ahead, piloted a few things and seen how best it's playing out in reality, it would have been a much better approach. And then I agree with you that trying to come out with this magnificent vision for a million drones in the sky and then not being in a place where even one is really flying is a very odd situation to be in. But Kaushik, now coming to you, we are seeing, I think, the reverse scenario, right? I mean, this is an area where content, right? An area where for many years we have gone on self-regulation, long history of self-regulation, especially visual content, and then suddenly there is a larger vision of enforcement. And interestingly, the enforcement vision might actually take off quite successfully because there are many litigants waiting all over the country to file PILs whenever there is a cuss word uttered on a digital platform, right? So it's a very interesting story, right? I mean, during COVID, it's one of the sectors that has grown multiple, factors, right? By multiple factors. And there is a lot of innovation, particularly in terms of understanding viewer preferences, tweaking content, creating very new kinds of content. For a change, we are not saddled with watching the Khans and their granddaddies on in theater. We can actually watch some very good, fine acting, some great storylines, some very bold content. And then here you are with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting now saying, look, finally it all has to pass through us, and we've already started seeing the pitfalls of that. I believe that Family Man 2, the second season, has been pushed out, and everybody now wants to go back to see what they have really created and evaluate whether it passes the test, so to say. So Kaushik, why did self-regulation not work? Or maybe even before that, it would be interesting to just see the kind of regulatory values at stake here, right? What happened to good old free speech? Sorry, you're on mute.
Okay. Am I audible
Yeah.
now? So yeah, I think it's important to take off from what Astha said about a principle-based approach, right? So as far as India is concerned, we at least have the benefit of a fantastically long, elaborate constitution of India, which fairly encompasses everything. And then there are laws for everything, right? Everything else. Uh, the regulatory approach in India across, I mean, both my fellow panelists have spoken about, I think it's testimony to what can be termed as legislative laziness, right? I mean, we pick up things, we first wait for some industry to, get to a place and then suddenly say, okay, now this industry is very good. Let's have a babu sitting somewhere, right? A babu should sit and regulate. And I take you guys back to, I think 2006, 1997, I think, when the TRAI was established, and they were supposed to have the control or the regulatory powers over the broadcast industry for I think 5 or 6 years. After which a BRAI, or a Broadcast Regulatory Authority of India, was supposed to come up. And we are sitting in 21. The outgoing chairman said, he actually told me very, very clearly that we are the guys who should regulate, because ultimately broadcast is all over telecom. So that brings us to the other question, that when our country really also had one of the more forward looking legislations in this country, like the convergence bill of 2000, why do we still don't have not have it? I mean, we've just discussed it, it's just a bill and it's everywhere else. Okay, so I mean, that's all context, but I think it's important to see here what is important to see here is that self-regulation, first of all, I think it's too early to write an obituary of self-regulation just yet, right? Uh, we are uh, we are an industry which has been around for a very small period of time. We are new. uh, Technology and inclusion are words which we are still discussing. Until we actually really spread out the entire access to, whether it's content, to technology, to anything under the sun, you can never really say that self-regulation has failed, because self-regulation is evolving. It is an evolving construct. Anirudh said, and very rightly, that there is never going to be a time that nothing wrong is going to happen or nothing illegal is going to happen. That is how it is. I mean, that is why you are in a society. There is a bunch of principles. We all regulate in our own way. So I think self-regulation has not failed, and it's too early. My and the unfortunate reality is that today, it seems, and it's not only in India, and it's across the world in that sense. There seems to be a, B team of every government trying to build capacity for regulation, right? Okay, we need to we need to regulate, so you suddenly see a spurt of cases. It's not as if before an X number of years there was no edgy content available. Edgy content was available all the time. This has only become easier, and there is social media and people talk about it. More importantly, it was there. I mean, a lot of us here would have seen quote unquote illegal content across entities. And again, and we are trying to regulate, and look at the definition, right? We are trying to regulate online content. What on earth is it? Let us define what is online, right? I spoke to a very fairly senior technology ministry official, and who said that OTT तो वही है ना, नेटफ्लिक्स पे होता है। और मेरे को समझ में नहीं आता, ये लोग आजकल एक पॉलिसी में, पेपर में किसी छोटे बाबू ने उनको लिख के भेजा था कि भाई साहब, व्हाट्सएप इज ऑल्सो OTT, एंड ही एक्चुअली डिफेंडेड that WhatsApp is different, it's just a messenger, there is OTT is different, it's over the top. And then he further went on to say, according to me, DTH is also OTT because there is no last mile wire. So, I mean, in a situation where we are still, trying to define what it is, and to Astha's point about the PDP bill, I think the bill should remain a bill till we can define what is personal information and what is not personal information. So, I think we should think about those things again. So I mean, self-regulation has clearly not failed. I think it's done fantastic in this country, in the nascent kind of a thing, space that we have had. The problem is that our regulators have missed the woods for the trees. If you want to regulate, you cannot regulate till such time you create a level playing field, and that responsibility is both on the regulator and on also the private companies or whoever is in the business. For content, for fake news, for anything else under the sun, you cannot have self regulation or government driven regulation till such time you have cross media ownership restrictions, for example. Right? I mean, I have worked for a company which had 16 publishing centers and 26 editions, 10, I think 50 odd news channels, I don't know how many portals. And how do you regulate a company like that? Can you do it? So I would clearly state that, I mean, honestly, personally speaking, when it is content that is age gated, maturity rated, and on demand after behind a paywall, you do not require a specific regulation to have to be specifically made for that. There are enough laws, enough principles, enough constitutional values that exist which give everybody the right to go to court. I mean, we've just released a couple of documentaries for a couple of clients, and we've had injunctions. We fought those injunctions. We are still fighting defamation cases, but I mean, that's life, right? The procedure is there. Why do you need this top down law which says you can't do this, you can't do that? In fact, for that matter, principles of such regulation already exist in the Cable Television Regulation Act. Take it out of there and do it. Those are the broader principles, and then you have to contextualize it. You can't suddenly say that anything said against a politician will be wrong. What kind of a discourse are we building? This is not, I mean, this is antithesis to democracy, right? So to answer your question, I don't think there is a failure of self-regulation. Self-regulation is taking time. It will take time. What we need from at least the guys who claim to be regulators is the aptitude for self-regulation to actually happen. And then you really do something against the country and whatever else, well, do what you have to. But how do you regulate somebody who doesn't need a license from you? Simple question. I mean, if I have to fight a case, I don't need a license to start an OTT platform, right? And I will never need it because I am not using what is known as common transmission infrastructure. The basis of licensing for radio, interesting, the radio license is given by the Post and Telegraph Department till now, right? But why licensing? What regulation? We have anybody who wants content online, well, pays for it. Then take away the construct of a free to air channel and a pay TV altogether, right? If you have that, then go ahead. Are you telling me that a citizen who can elect a government can't decide what they should see in their own household? I mean, how terrible is that? How terrible is that?
So Kaushik, I mean, I think the one of the challenges, and this is where I would like to bring the super regulator of all, right, which is the Supreme Court in the Indian context, right? I mean, finally, the babus can do what they want, and we as industry folks can say what we like, but fundamentally, all it takes is one PIL, right? You go to the court, and the ethos of the court has changed, right, significantly. I mean, I think one should call it out for what it is. which is that in I think it was 1990, right? You had the Rangarajan case where the court very vociferously defended the rights of the movie maker and said that, look, if somebody has a problem, it is up to the law enforcement officials to stand guard outside the theater and ensure that the movie sees a theatrical release, right? And today you come to the same institution, which is essentially saying if religious sentiments are hurt, you cannot even be making that content, right? So I mean, in the context of particularly content, right, and what emerging technologies have done to content, which to me in a lot of ways is quite amazing, right? I genuinely feel that there is a lot of innovation that has happened on account of tech, but you have the super regulator which is really now siding in some sense on a certain spectrum, or end of that spectrum, or especially on matters of rights and principles, right? So in that context, how do you really sort of look at anything that is workable when it comes to regulating content in India, and specifically to the Indian
Oh,
scenario?
I mean, I think there are enough lawyers on this panel, and we'll refrain from calling out the Supreme Court of India. But having said that, ultimately, every institution in the country is, unfortunately, in a democracy, a reflection of the current disposition. And when, as a Supreme Court, I mean, if even if you go into the latest the notices that have been issued on Twitter, etc., there is very little that a Supreme Court can do when a PIL comes in, right? In fact, in their own form or way, they are being fair and just issuing notice. What they have done is issued notice, everybody come here and show up, instead of dismissing it. And that I think is fair. I don't see much to talk about in that. What is important here, however, is the fact that the position that the executive is taking on a variety of these things. I mean, the affidavits that are being filed, and as far as the court is concerned, they can only act on what is in front of them, right? And I will not go into the stories about how there is influencing judiciary is happening, etc., etc. I mean, that's something that I don't think I am in a correct place to speak about. But I don't really see something very wrong in what the judiciary is up to right now, honestly. And to that point, I think there is a fair bit of reporting and misreporting that is happening, which is part of the larger framework of regulation again. And no amount of regulation can stop that, because if the the news provider or the news channel or the platform chooses to do away with their specific responsibility to the community, then no amount of regulation can work. Nothing can work, nothing will work, and nothing should work. I mean, there are enough uh, kind of instances of that. And to that extent, if something like that happens and there's a PIL in the Supreme Court issues notice. And I think around 70-80% of all the cases, after a fair kind of an argument or whatever, the Supreme Court has really taken a stand broadly towards free speech. I think we'll have to give it to them. But yes, there are a few dissents that have happened. There are a few things that have been reported in a manner wherein you said that Supreme Court has possibly given. But what does the court do? I mean, you come up with the PIL unless you're saying absolute trash. And if it's in the right format, and Anirudh would know this, if you written in the right format, it comes up before a judge, he will say, fine, issue notice and give another date. Let's see what happens.
Right,
Right?
right, right.
So I don't see a problem with that. What I do have a problem with, however, is more and more instances of our three, you know, um, estates, and the fourth one I tend to forget because it possibly doesn't exist anymore in this country. But the three estates are funnily transgressing each other's functions, which is very strange, right? The legislative, the executive, the judiciary. Well, you have very defined roles, and if everybody does really does those roles, it's really the utopia that you want to live in thereafter. So I think that transgression piece has to stop, and it's more from the executive than the judiciary, to my mind. I mean, more and more, we see these laws changing, and we normally just track the larger policy directives, but there are a lot of these smaller things that happen, right? And the power structures with the bureaucracy are changing to a point where a bureaucrat today has become a quasi judge,
Right. Right.
right? I mean, it's the same thing like the drones thing. I mean, you will be begging before, I think, 20 bureaucrats to give you licenses before you fly that drone. So I think that is something that is scary. That is scary. Content regulation from within the industry, honestly, can and will only happen if it is allowed to happen through government creating a level playing field. In that sense, you
Right.
can't have the government taking a stand and then saying that, boss, you have to do something like this.
Right. Right.
Can't do that.
No, thanks, Kaushik. I think you have really sort of, in many ways, contextualized self-regulation in as it happens or has happened in the content industry. I do think that to have a rights friendly set of regulations or regulatory principles, you need a pretty vibrant polity, right? And I think there the fact of transgressions that you mentioned can definitely come in the way of having both a healthy debate as well as a substantive set of norms which are promoting of democracy and rights rather than acting antithetically. Finally, I come to you, Rahul. I mean, if there is somebody here who can really qualify for that moniker regulatory subject, it is you, right? I mean, I was checking out some facts and figures about the online gaming industry, and a recent report by Deloitte indicates that by 2022 the industry itself is poised to be about 2.2 billion and dollars, and it's a very fast growing industry. So viewed from that perspective, and the fact that there is a lot of employment generation, there's a lot of very exciting content creation, entertainment provided. In fact, I think Reed Hastings pointed out that Netflix primary competitor is the gaming industry and not a rival OTT platform. So with all of that in mind, you should be having friendly regulators, or am I wrong in saying that?
Oh, you're absolutely wrong. We have plenty of people who dislike us.
Uh-huh.
And first of all, thank you for having me on this platform. I really enjoy. I'm actually learning more than anyone else. I feel at this moment. But I want to start by starting the point of the story of why we started Jungly Games. Right? While being born and brought up here, we left the country and I got educated abroad. And I learned a lot, in the US and Canada and a bunch of places. And when and I say we, me and my co-founder, but when I saw India was starting to open up the internet, 2010, 2011, 2008, around those years, I thought this is great. Here's an opportunity, seeing Flipkart do what it was doing and Free Charge and a lot of Paytm, right? All these early innovators in their spaces, that we could also come and start something and innovate. Right, innovate in a space which didn't exactly exist. Dominate, of course. At the end of the day, we do want to have some benefit of doing all the hard work, but really put the country also in the benefits of everything you described. Right, start an industry, the gaming industry, launch jobs. Push people in a direction of digital transformation. And there's a lot of technology, a lot of learning that comes out of gaming as well. Right, it's good for your mind, it's good for your acuity and a bunch of other things. So that's sort of the interest that pulled us in. We were innovators, or we wanted to launch something. In my early years, I learned that no one understood gaming, and it was actually in the beginning in 2012, no one gave us a bank account. So I came and I couldn't speak Hindi. Now I speak really good Hindi, decent at least at the moment. And so I think it not only just the fact that I was NRI or whatever, but the fact that I'm trying to launch a gaming company, and on top of that, a real money gaming company. So you bring money to the table to play. The banks didn't give us a bank account. Payment gateways didn't want to touch us. But interestingly, who helped us? The new age payment gateways, right? the early innovators of India at that time, the startup community, everyone was thinking like this, right? We're all innovators, all of us, right? And what generally innovators do in that sense is regulation is the farthest thing from their mind, right? If they want to create something, they'd go and create. Now this is true for the artist community, the filmmaking industry, everything, right? It's what you do. So games is of course a bit of art as well, right? We create an experience, we do what we do. So we were all very positive about that space, and we started creating. And as you know, like all industries grew, not just gaming, of course, right? E-commerce grew, and ride sharing grew with Ola and Uber, and Swiggy and food tech and fintech and so on. Today we are in court. We are in court in multiple states, because many states have suddenly woken up and decided, just like OTT or content regulation, that gaming is not right for everyone, and we are facing blanket bans, right? Just like the drone industry, there's no thought given to what we're trying to actually ban, or why, or who. It's just they woke up and they said, you know what, not good for anyone. Don't know why, but everyone ban. So I have been on the receiving end. No friendly regulators, of course. Been to the Supreme Court and back. In 2016, Rummy went all the way to the Supreme Court. Luckily, the Supreme Court's wisdom prevailed, and it was dismissed, right? Over the simple fact that it's a skill game. So we don't have to get to the specifics of what happened. What I'm trying to say is, I've been in this cycle of regulation, facing regulation. I don't get to say anything. I just hear from my lawyers that, hey, by the way, new case, Rahul, we have to go here. Or please sign here. I signed a lot of affidavits, and a lot of petitions, writ petitions, and so on. And then we face who we face, right? All I can tell you is the innovation is not dead. We are still trying. I am still trying. Plenty of people are still trying. And honestly, it will not die till the day, of course, regulation comes to a point where it takes away the most important thing, which is the benefit. The only reason we're doing this, like, I don't have any interest in, facing myself, running a business that faces itself in court. But there is a benefit to it, right? And there's a benefit to society, but let's be fair, there's a benefit to me as well. And if that benefit is taken away, no one's going to get into this. If drone businesses or drone technology is not giving any benefit to someone, no one's going to start a company in that space. Right. But now I want to take a separate 2 minutes to talk about innovation occurs in the West because they let people do things, within the bounds of the law, which basically just say don't hurt anyone, right? That's the very basic sense of it. Now, very easy example. Zuckerberg started Facebook in college, where he stuck people's pictures on the website without telling them. Imagine you do that today. Now you start a website now, you stick pictures of everyone, and then you let other people rate whether they're hot or not, which is sort of demeaning or encouraging depending on how you look to people. But the reality is you're personally psychologically shattered, and that's what happened to a lot of college students who logged into his created website, saw their photo, and then saw like either they were very liked or very hated. And that was Facebook, but he didn't go to jail. They didn't kill him. He got to launch the company. He got out of college, and yeah, he faced whatever some disciplinary actions and modes along the way. But the point is, Facebook today runs the country. In fact, to the point where it influenced elections. And even then they didn't ban it, right? Even then they took him to, we've all seen and heard, him speaking in Senate and everything around that. They're not trying to kill his business. They're simply telling him to like calm down and regulate, right? And so he goes in and he does, or Facebook itself today regulates a lot of content that they have to do, right? But you see the way the innovation is not dead. And drones are flying in the US, they're not flying in India, right? Cryptocurrency is taking off in the US, it's not taking off in India. A lot of the stuff, interestingly, that Anirudh works on is doing well in the US. I have no idea what he's doing here, other than facing court again and again. But that's the point. If India just keeps hitting everything one at a time, they're going to lose people like us, right? They're going to lose the innovators. The next few people who want to be the Flipkarts of the country will not be here. They're going to go away to a jurisdiction, to an area where they can innovate. And I think that's the biggest danger to us. But so far, I mean, we're here, we're fighting, we're trying to change minds, and hopefully in one day, not today, but one day put a regulator we like in place. I've never called them babus, by the way. I have no idea who a babu is. I'm learning these terms, like I said, right now. But we need people who know what we're doing, right? And have experience of this. So hopefully that day will come. Let's see.
Right. So no, Rahul, I think this is really the kind of conversations that we would love to hear more at the conclave, and people sort of vehemently looking at these positions. And I loved it that you took up Zuckerberg. I mean, you could have said Bezos, you could have said Bill Gates, the the mild guy, but you said let's take Zuckerberg and defend the guy. I mean, that's quite amazing and remarkable and honest. So and that's great. So, I mean, just to come back to the gaming industry, right? I mean, so in all these conversations with your lawyers, and I'm sure that there are different, very complicated, very nuanced legal issues, and my mind goes into a tizzy when I try to understand the gaming sector, the regulations that govern. But at the root of all this is this very old enactment, right? The 1867 Public Gambling Act, and we had a telecom panel a few days ago where we were talking about 1885 Telegraph Act, right? So is part of the problem. I mean, based on your conversations with lawyers, your direct interaction with regulators, is part of the problem the complete lack of a legislative update, or is it just sort of a morality play at a deeper level? I mean,
Sure,
what
sure.
is really going on here?
There are three problems, right? In no
Mhm.
particular order. Problem
Mhm.
number one is the people on the other side are not gamers. They have not experienced this while growing up, nor do they may have children and cousins or whatever who play games, but they have no idea. They have no idea. I have seen judges, I've seen lawyers say things where I thought, like, do you not have Tetris on your phone? Like, have you not seen what Pac-Man is, or some of these very basic things that we all know about today till date of some sort. So they don't know gaming, so there's someone on the other side who should really understand that. B, the benefits are not, as you said, the legislative update, I'll come to number three, but even the benefits of gaming are not updated across the world in that sense, or in this case in India. Like, people really don't understand why gaming is good. Why, like, what's the point? Cricket, everyone understands is good. You go out, you play, your health is well, you see stars on TV, and you aspire to be like them. But there's nothing, no play given to gaming in the country, even from like an education point of view, extracurricular push point of view, right? Whereas you see across the world, China, US, whatever, they're all, again, doing this at the high school level, right? Kids in school are being encouraged to play games because they know the future is a lot interconnected with digital extremities of your physical connection with the device. So you should know, how fast can you push a button, how fast can you think, and so on. But the third thing is, now coming to your point, third thing is legislative update, of course, right? Like, no one has sat down and said, forget us. I mean, I think even e-commerce laws are yet to be like properly written. Ride sharing laws have yet to be properly written. Fintech laws, have yet to be properly written. Gaming is just one in the long list. The challenge is, again, abroad, people are just running past this really fast. So I think Anirudh was the one who said that 4 years for the crypto law to come into play effectively for India. Whereas, abroad, people are already ready with their pieces, right? Already ready with their law. Here, I have no idea where do we sit on any of these industries. Forget gaming. Gaming is, one of those last things I think we'll get to. But it's really sad. And I have no idea how people get elected into these positions, what you have to study to be there and get there. But if you're reading a law from 1865, and then you're being quizzed on that, I guess, to see if you understand the law effectively, that's not fair, right? It's 2021. You should have thoughts more around what's present. So honestly, I'm waiting for people who understand to come into, in those positions, so we can have much more fruitful conversations, which will never happen.
I mean, Rahul, hopefully there is a little more optimism from some of us, and we are hoping that from a policy point of view, there is more understanding of emerging tech. I mean, that takes me back to Astha on the whole question of information asymmetry, right? And before that, I'd like you to respond to this whole question of innovation versus responsible regulations, right? And then how do you see that line as someone who's working on technology and society, the bend break, and let's understand, figure it out, then regulate model versus let's be a little cautious, let's have a little bit of anticipatory governance out there. I mean, how do you sort of perceive this as a researcher, and then coming to the other aspect of how do you kind of bridge this information gaps, right, that exist between those who regulate and the regulated subjects.
Right. I mean, on this like question of regulation versus innovation, like I said, like it's a hard one. But I think that I mean, just because we come at it from a perspective of the rights based approach to some of this, and thinking about the consequences and harms that may occur as a result of some of these technologies, my initial sense is to take a more careful approach to this. But of course, recognizing that that what Rahul was saying, that we cannot stifle this, we cannot afford to have businesses like Jungly leave India because of difficult regulation. But at the same time, too, and Kaushik mentioned this as well, there is some sense in thinking about self-regulation and thinking about evolving principles and standards to do that. So I think that that's something that we need to think about as a community. And in terms of information asymmetry, I think that the consultative approach is the most critical one. How do we do this in a way that involves all the different stakeholders, whether it's industry, but also civil society, policy, sort of the tech policy community, but also the government. And I think that, and we were all around when TRI was doing net neutrality and contemplating that. And I think that that process, the transparency, the collaborative nature of the net neutrality discussion in India is something that we all, hark back to as, and also has then been reflected in the documentation that came out of that process. So I think that, and making sure that we have open houses, forums, platforms, constant engagement on policy documents is critical. And I think that we lost our way, like the PDP hasn't followed that process, the NPD also, where everybody's super worried that the second draft is going to be the last one and then it's going to go into the drafting stage. It's all concerning, and it needs, these are all new ideas that need to really be sort of beaten about to see whether they work or not. And I think that so if we can replicate that consultative process that TRIDE undertook in net neutrality, I think that would be. And then finally, I think, like, I mean, this is perhaps unrelated, but also a broader citizen information movement is also required, which again holds all of these different moving parts accountable. And again, the net neutrality one was such a brilliant example of getting, whether it was comedians or actors or whoever else involved in this, the industry obviously played a huge role in mobilizing resources to do that. So I think that that also is a critical component, because it cannot just be a conversation between regulators and and tech companies. I think there needs to be a greater space actively engineered to get more citizen involvement in these debates.
Right. Kaushik, in fact, some of these points, right? I mean, the consultative nature of the process, how regulators are sort of receptive. And the other point that Andrew mentioned, right? The multiple regulators that are at play, right? So could you sort of comment a little bit about what you have seen, particularly in the case of content? Because again, it's one of those sectors where it till very recently, we did not even know which ministry is actually going to look into OTT, right? I mean, so where do you see consultative processes working well? Have they worked at all? And where do you see again this whole issue of coordination among regulators playing out? How well has it fared so far, and how do you think that can be improved, if at all there is a need to do so? I mean, would like to know your thoughts. Sorry, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself, Kaushik?
Yeah, sorry, sorry guys.
No.
That's telling about the fact that we are very bad at technology. I'm sorry, Rahul. You'll hate me for this. I can't even unmute myself. But yeah, I think while the intent has been there off and on to consult, but the whole process of consultation has been so ad hoc across the content industry, right? And I speak about content. I actually talk about newspapers, radio, television, and now OTT, right? So for the I'd mentioned that the radio license in India is still issued under the Telegraph Act. Some 1800 something that act was made. A cable operator today, even now, takes permission from the local post office for a pole permission of his wire. What are we talking about? So I mean, and so whenever there's been a consultation, the process in that sense has been good. But here I will actually hold a large part of the private industry also liable for, for being unable to see what is a community and what is the ecosystem, and kind of giving preference to their own commercial interests. And it again ties back into saying that consultation, self-regulation, any of those nice little things can work if there is a level playing field, number one, that the regulator needs to create. Again, the regulator needs to make the larger principled laws keep them in place. Cross media, have restrict cross media ownership and cross tech ownership now. Media and tech, ultimately everything depends on the delivery platform. Rahul spoke about it, Anirudh spoke about it. It is the delivery of the service or the product which is where the actual innovation is. So content, the content that's created, the content that's delivered, both need to be seen on the same platform. And consultation, the problem with consultation is, I think even on the OTT space, they had a consultation paper of some sort. There was one consultation paper that came from the TRAI, incidentally, about content. And we were all left wondering what was the TRAI doing in content in the first place, because they are supposed to regulate only tariff, right? Then there is an MIB which can't figure what it should do, because beyond the program code, which again does not regulate broadcasters, it regulates the cable operator, who till recently you didn't even know has how many primary points, because nothing was digital. And this is the same industry which then again now wants to consult about rating systems. Boss, everybody has a digital box. There's a I mean, Rahul would know and Anirudh would know much more about this because they are tech guys, but I mean, there can be a simple ping back and I will know who's watching what. Why do you need BARC anyway? So I think the consultative, to just wind this down on content, consultation has happened. I'm not saying it's not happened,
Right.
but it has been so ad hoc, and it has been so limited to each bureaucrat's fief. It has to be, I mean, content is the biggest thing around. Everything is content. Everything is content, right? And to that, when people speak about that content, you make these little silos. No, we'll talk about only OTT without defining OTT. That is another story. But we will talk about only television. No, because what is on OTT, see, please understand, the television is an OEM. It's hardware. I mean, anything can go anywhere. So if you are regulating it and if there is consultation, then you have to include everybody in that consultation process. What do? How does the consultation paper go out? They pick out the list of names from NBA or News Broadcasters Association, and then pick up the list from the MAI, then pick out the list from IBF, and send out letters. Is that consultation? No. Where is the audience?
Right.
That is
No,
also
I think,
consultation, right?
yes. Yeah. So the point is that there has to be a meaningful consultative process. So, I mean, Anirudh, you have been working on this for a while, right? I mean, seeing different technologies, and at Ikigai, I mean, you function very differently from many other firms, right? In the sense you create a lot of knowledge and data and research around many of these themes, often just for sheer interest and dissemination, right? And how have you like, if you were to sort of come back to all of us here with the set of regulatory principles, with consultation, or rather meaningful consultation being one part of it, but many others to it, how would you try to bridge this information asymmetry problem, which I'm sure is a genuine issue, right? I mean, often the guys who are regulating have not played those video games or Tetris or any of that, right? So how do you sort of get them to be in that position to internalize some of these values and norms? How does one do that meaningfully? So
Sure. So I think a few regulators have done a good job, a better job at it than others. In fact, if I were to take an example of the drones industry itself, I think there was a very nice kind of for the first time. I think the public consultations for the space were held outside of Delhi, right? So one is that you have to go to your you have to make sure that you're reaching your audience, and so consultations were held in Delhi, in Mumbai, in Bangalore, everywhere where there's a major kind of industry, hub of of the industry essentially. That was one principle, but I think consultation need to be pretty much part of the value system, right? In the way that you are. In fact, I think you and I have discussed this often, that the Supreme Court verdict, right, which says that, well, if the preamble, and this is I think, the, if I'm not wrong, the TRI Act in question, that where the preamble of the act itself talks of transparency, then the requirement of holding a consultation before promulgating any new policy is to be read into that, right? So I think that is something which I think needs to be pretty much. I think that's the kind of thinking that needs to seep into just about any tech related policy discussion, that you have to consult the industry. That is one part of it, and I think the other is. That typically I believe that a self-regulatory approach often always works better in ensuring that regulations are in line with are in sync with what the industry, in how the industry is evolving. So no matter how much consultation you do, see ultimately, in a way, consultations have also been done in the crypto industry, right? In fact, one of our biggest arguments before the Supreme Court in the matter that in 2018 was that, well, the RBI has not done any consultations whatsoever, right? You have and it was a challenge on grounds of proportionality, that for and the and how we argued that, well, there is no proportionality between risks and mitigating factors or regulation, was that firstly you don't understand the risks, you have just not consulted the industry, you don't understand what's going on. But in response to that, they did conduct consultations in a manner that it was largely an eyewash. That in fact there is now an interministerial committee which has submitted a report, and therefore they have a good probably a good ground before the court to say that, well, consultations have been done, or study has been done. But in the reality is that I don't know any member from the industry who's actually been ever part of those discussions, right? So I think consultations also need to be, the design of your consultative process is also is as critical as the value of of doing that in the first place. And I think in the drones industry we did that job reasonably well. It still worked out. I think why it didn't. The problem was that by the entire industry was so tired or exhausted by the end of this 5-year journey, that the industry was willing to take whatever was handed down, right? So we just stopped pushing beyond the point, right? But I think from a design perspective, the fact that you go to your audience, you go outside of Delhi, I think these are some principles which could play well.
Rahul, before we move to student presentations, we are running a little short on time, but I really want to ask you this. I don't know whether I'm pulling you into one of those extremely controversial terrains, but I think you are in a very interesting position to respond probably to this, which is the whole issue of nationalism as a value of regulation, right? I mean, you've spoken about morality, you've spoken about innovation rights. And one thing that I hear, particularly from your city, Bangalore, is why don't we build, the next Atmanirbhar, India, and why don't we use regulation as part of this whole narrative? And I don't want to name names, but you know who they are. You are part of an interesting community. You are an innovator, but you're also, I'm sure, as a startup, founder, in conversation with many such names, as an investor, as an angel investor, so on. You have some bit of insider insight into that whole conversation, right? And And it's also interesting that some of it is happening even in the US, right? I mean, maybe as in juxtaposition with China, but there is that whole idea of let's do best for the country, right? And that's really now sort of seeding into conversations around regulating of emerging tech, right? And what are your thoughts on it, and your perspective on this?
I think again there are multiple approaches. So I think maybe there are three approaches to this, right? Nationalism. I don't won't ask you for a definition. I'll just say this. It's maybe you could approach it from the fact like, what are you creating? Does that make the country look good or bad? Or then the second part, what are you creating? Is that going to uplift the country or nationalism in this case? Against other countries. So this one's easy example is, China made PUBG. Everyone here plays PUBG. India says, cut PUBG, make your own game, right? Simple, right? So that's fine. Like I'll come to that. And the third piece is, should you even think about nationalism when you make anything, right? When you're as an innovator, as a creator, should you even think about it, right? And my perspective is, it's a very Indian dad thing to say like, behave yourself, be quiet, don't say a curse word, don't do this, don't do that, right? Like a lot of don'ts. And a very American dad thing to say, you just go like, do whatever you want. You're 10 years old, you want to drink beer, I don't care. Just be nice to everyone, right? Like it's a different mentality. So I do subscribe to the fact that, look, if you want to create something, create something. The people will tell you if they want it or don't want it. So even when you bake in some nationalism to it, utilizing the resources of the country or putting it some effect to that, some flavor to that in what you're creating, you do what you want to do. Because if you put too many filters in your mind, honestly, again, I go back to my point, you'll never innovate. See, innovators simply ask one question, why not? That's all they ask. They read regulation also and they say, why not? I can't fly a drone, why not? I can't buy cryptocurrency, why not? I can't make this movie, why not? I can't make this game, why not? Right? And I think if the answer at the end of the question is someone will die, then go ahead and do it, right? Like as long as no one said, see, we already have all the laws in place to protect people, whether it's financial fraud or whether it's physical harm or whether it's mental harm. Like forget digital coming into play, like even any type of world you pick, right? We already have the basic laws in place for being a reasonably civil society, right? Yet we're seeing people be violent for any reason. But the point is, we still have these laws. So now let the innovators ask why not, let them create, let the people tell them whether they want this or not. You don't need this backlash from everyone else. So it's very simple with China making games or US making games and them being popular in this country. What are they telling you? The people want these games. So why don't you let our people create these games, right? Like why am I having to go to court to defend esports? And the fact that it's a skill game and the fact that it's going to be a worldwide phenomenon, which it already is in many places, right? Why do I have to do all this when the people in the country are telling you they want this, right? This content has come out, right? Same thing with movies, same thing with books, same thing with anything. So I think that as long as that why not question is allowed, we'll be a great nation. Otherwise, nationalism or no nationalism, dude, like we're all leaving. Like all of us, why not people are going.
Great. So I think that's a great time for us to now bring up the student presentation on regulation of cryptocurrencies. We will have them present for about 20 minutes and then there's a Q&A segment. I may request each of you to spare another 10 minutes if that's not a problem and none of you have a hard stop, because I think they would really love to get that feedback and see where they can improve their work. So Shanton, can we bring up the presentation? And I think the group is ready.
A very good evening to the esteemed panel, Daksha faculty, fellows, and the guests who have joined us online today. I am Sharanya Mukherjee. My team comprises of Utkarsh Kumar, Shatakshi Shekhar, P. Vashishtan, and Shraddhanjali Sharma. Before we begin, we must say that we are very grateful for the constant guidance and inputs that we have received from our mentors, the Dean Dr. Padmanabhan and Mr. Shantan Datta. In this presentation, we'll be delving into the regulatory challenges that are posed for cryptocurrencies and the way forward from here. So the Indian government is contemplating on introducing a legislation to ban cryptocurrency trading, mining, and investments in the country. The proposed legislation will pave the way for the Reserve Bank of India to create a central bank-backed digital currency. Now, before we discuss and get into the details of this, we have to discuss that the term cryptocurrency in itself can arguably be very misleading because of its multifaceted nature. We have noticed that there is a lack of a standard terminology which is used by global regulators. Across countries, they are referred to with various terms ranging from crypto assets, digital currency, digital asset, virtual currency, distributed ledger assets. Now, let me quickly walk you through the overview of our presentation. To set the theoretical framework for this, Utkarsh will be dealing with the features of cryptocurrency. Then we will be looking at how there has been a lack of regulation of cryptocurrencies in India, the existing concerns, followed by a proposed regulatory mechanism before we finally will ponder on why that might not work. So regulators have repeatedly pointed out concerns such as terrorist financing, tax evasion, money laundering as some of the reasons why cryptocurrency should be banned. This actually reminds me of a joke. Why won't the government embrace Bitcoin? It's because they hate the idea of proof of work. So with that, I now hand it over to Utkarsh to take us through the features of cryptocurrency.
Hello. Though the cryptocurrency is always in the news for the past few years, let's take a look at the technology behind cryptocurrencies. A typical cryptocurrency is based on a blockchain technology where blocks of transaction form a publicly accessible ledger. The servers in the case of peer-to-peer technologies keep this ledger distributed and public with identical copies of ledger on each node. The authenticity of the transactions is verified by cryptography using hash functions or digital signatures and similar technologies. In order to make the blocks universally accepted, different consensus algorithms are used, like proof of work is used in Bitcoins. In order to compensate the node operators for this, they are rewarded with crypto assets based on predetermined formulas and a transaction fee. According to the features like accessibility, electronic access, central bank's role, and peer-to-peer access, the Bank for International Settlements has classified different forms of currencies. The non-government cryptocurrencies being peer-to-peer and electronic is not accessible universally due to lack of recognition, while a centrally bank issued cryptocurrency possesses all the characteristics of money and can be used as a viable option. Now we'll have a look at the timeline of cryptocurrencies in India with respect to the regulation.
So between 2013 and 17, the RBI and Ministry of Finance issued several press releases which cautioned the users about the risks of virtual currency. Some of the reasons cited by the regulator include the lack of backing by a central bank, matter of speculation, it was not underpinned by an asset, so on. In 2017, there was also an interdisciplinary committee which was set up by the Ministry of Finance to study cryptocurrencies and the growth of virtual currencies. This report was, however, not made public, and several RTIs filed were also denied on the grounds of being of strategic importance. In 2018, later, the finance minister, Arun Jaitley, in his union budget speech, said that cryptocurrencies are not legal tender and cannot be used as a part of payment systems. On 6th April 2018, this was a very important circular that the RBI issued, and this banned entities from providing services to crypto firms in India. Prior to this circular, the crypto industry was fairly an unregulated one and more or less represented a free market in many respects. They facilitated crypto trading, and all of them had to shut down or move abroad. Those that did continue to operate here did so on a peer-to-peer basis because the formal banking system and the payment companies, of course, refused to do business with them. The industry then challenged this circular in a writ petition before the Supreme Court. While the case was still pending before the apex court, the interdisciplinary committee proposed a complete ban on its digital assets. In March 2020, the Supreme Court of India overturned this circular, and this was done on the grounds of proportionality. We will be discussing this in one of our later slides. Very recently, like in last month, January 2021, the RBI announced that it is exploring the possibility as to whether there's a need for a digital version of the fiat currency. And in case there is, then how to operationalize it. Also, recently we came to know from the Lok Sabha bulletin that the government also plans to introduce the Cryptocurrency and Regulation Official Digital Currency Bill 2021 during the budget session of 2021.
Let us now have a look at concerns associated with the unregulated nature of crypto assets right now. This sector is plagued with issues such as tax considerations. Traders don't know if to treat it as a commodity, hence no indirect tax, and investors don't know whether to treat it as securities or capital assets in order to calculate short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains over the profits they book. The lack of consumer grievance mechanism for retail investors in crypto asset exchanges in India is another concern. With the unregulated rise of a parallel private currency system, there's an increasing threat to monetary stability of official currency and the ability of the central bank, that is RBI in our case, to control macroeconomic stability. Blockchain, though itself being quite secure, is not enough to prevent crypto asset fraud, as we have seen in recent years, as the private keys are still being stored in digital wallets. Any such fraud is not being redressed due to non-recognition of the values of the underlying crypto assets. The use of crypto assets in an arbitrage of foreign currency may open door to another set of problems. And we have already seen the use of crypto assets for money laundering, which leads to organized crimes and sometimes also to terrorism. The widespread malpractices in crypto exchanges with respect to the retail investors is not a new phenomenon. Let us have a look now why a regulation in this space is a good idea. We have seen increasing cryptocurrency scams in recent years. The transaction fees for the wallet transfers are unregulated, arbitrary, and very high. The speculative trading in crypto assets is leading to price volatility. The decentralized nature of nodes must be identified. The current pseudonymity is not compliant with anti-money laundering and combating the finance of terrorism norms. The conflict between the node operators is leading to events like forking without taking into considerations the interest of retail investors. The unregulated nature of crypto wallets is giving rise to fly-by-night companies duping the retail investors. Let us also have a look at why regulation may not work or what would be the drawbacks of such a regulation. Legislative overreach may lead to over-regulation and hence antagonize the industry. There are legacy issues associated with regulations in India, as we have already discussed about it, where all the stakeholders are not consulted, and there is a unilateral regulation imposed upon the industries. The regulation may also lead to a shift of a portion of industry to the black market in order to avoid regulation. And while the law enforcement agencies are not modernized enough to detect such violations. And as previously seen, a premature over-regulation may lead to the stifling of takeoff of this nascent technology, which is still yet developing, and the industry may move to the jurisdictions having lesser regulatory controls.
After having listed out the features, the concerns, and the scope of cryptocurrency market, I guess all of us here are convinced that it isn't going back. And as all the panelists have also agreed, banning it is an easier option, but then we'll be deprived of a lot of opportunities as an economy and as players individually. Let us now move to a model which, in our opinion, can be adopted to regulate the field. Regulation is important in order to bring stability in this untethered domain, to encourage innovation, protect new players and investors, control monetary stability, and of course, the greatest impetus of all, increase tax bases. Also, regulation of this domain is required to combat money laundering, terror financing, organized crimes, and tax evasion. Before delving into the nuances of the substantive and procedural parts of the mechanism, I would like to quickly mention that the proposed model entails both retrofitted regulation, that is bringing in amendments to the existing legislations, and bespoke regulation, which is having a dedicated legislation for this market. Just like Malta's Virtual Finance Assets Act, the approach in our understanding to regulate this area should be a harmonious mix of activity-based and entity-based regulations. Starting from the first point of substantive part of the proposal, we recommend that crypto should be treated at par with securities, thus making SEBI a fit watchdog for this domain. The contentious issue of volatility can be mitigated by having a crypto reserve under the authority of Reserve Bank of India. As a pilot project, our team thinks that the route of remittance should be taken into consonance for this adopted technology, since it is time efficient and low on transaction costs. The aspect of competition can be well regulated by CCI, that is the Competition Commission of India. Since crypto is a phenomenon not leaving the world, we all feel that all the countries should get together in agreement of a model convention under the UNCITRAL. Transaction charges and wallet companies need to be regulated, and customers can't be left into lurch after investing. And we can adopt this from what Singapore is already doing. Finally, we believe a bespoke regulatory legislation is required to govern this domain since it is technologically innovative and requires legislation to protect the players' innovation and the consumers who are new to the field. The regulator under this legislation should thus delve into the nuances of the technology and be given power to oversee the aspects which are specifically beyond the domain of SEBI and RBI. Moving on to the procedural part of the regulatory framework, KYC is needed to help financial institutions like banks and cryptocurrency exchanges in order to mitigate the risk of being intentionally or unintentionally exploited by bad actors via illicit financial behavior. It shall foster a better understanding between the financial institutions and its customers, helping to manage expectations and determine the best investment options available. The traders of crypto must be registered just like share brokers or commodity brokers, and hence the trading must be regulated via such registration. Since regulatory sandbox, which has already been discussed by the panelists, is the safe haven for a technology like this, for it allows its testing in a closed environment. And more importantly, in a regulatory vacuum, we can say that it's like feeding into the regulation making process for emerging technologies. By providing cryptocurrencies operators this platform, regulators will be able to assess the exact approach that is required. In our opinion, one critical feature that any entrant will need to satisfy is that the proposed innovation should should show the promise of easing and effecting delivery of financial services in a significant way. Administrative regulation calls for bringing amendments to the existing framework of the IT Act, Payment and Settlement Act, Banking Regulation Act, in order to incorporate the functioning of the current cryptocurrency and assets and safeguard its stakeholders. Our proposed solution is that we begin with a digital taxonomy model. The purpose being simple, that crypto is a developing area right now, and it has no formal structure per se. A digital taxonomy model will help in categorization of the different kinds of crypto and also provide for a basic foundation, hence institutionalizing it in some way. We already have a basic classification model, that is whether cryptos are coins, tokens, securities, etc. But we can further classify it based on additional parameters such as what purpose will be used, how will it be used, and what is its utility. For example, we classify it based on the mode of payment, protocol improvement, utility token, etc. Further, we feel that the hybrid digital currency is the best idea because a portion of the currency can be kept in digital form backed by cryptography, and it should not be convertible to cash. The idea is to further clarify the legal character of digital assets as commodities regulate security tokens, and these may be asset backed in order to reduce volatility. Legal framework for digital assets is needed to foster a smooth ecosystem for service providers and exchanges. Since cryptocurrency has been placed under the negative list, sadly, one cannot say whether technology can be applied in a more efficient way. We thus propose that it should be removed from the negative list to test its efficacy under the regulatory sandbox model.
So, like we saw in the timeline, the 2018 circular was challenged by the industry under the aegis of Internet and Mobile Association of India. They were challenged on various grounds, but some of them were that the RBI, first of all, did not have the power to prohibit the activity of trading in virtual currencies. And even assuming that they had such power, such power was not exercised properly. This was their contention. However, the court noted that the RBI had jurisdiction over virtual currencies because they had this comes directly under their domain. Therefore, there was no challenge regarding the jurisdiction of RBI over virtual currencies. And the court also acknowledged the importance of the banking channel for such a business. So now, having looked at that, we'll look at the hindrances that this model might face. Like the panel was discussing, there is a lack of stakeholder consultation which has been there. We have seen from our past experiences how deeply disconnected the regulators have been from the industry. On the one hand, although there have been various try consultations which have taken place in the past, similarly for the data privacy bill as well, we have seen consultations taking place across the country. However, it was quite surprising to see that there was no consultation process at all or independent research to back up RBI circular dated April 6, 2018. Various RTIs as well as the Supreme Court submissions of the parties confirm this fact. So what has happened in the past is that, while trying to rigidly regulate emerging technologies with very little data, precedence, and domain knowledge, regulators have often overestimated the risks involved in this, and they have therefore overregulated and underestimated the rewards that come with such innovation. So this has ultimately resulted in stifling various innovations like the panel has discussed. So I'll not go very detailed into it. Having said that, however much we deliberate into such concerns and the possible risks associated with it, we'll have to just wait and watch the final how this the final contours of the bill turn out to be on the basis of industry consultations and stakeholder feedback. Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of the presentation. Feedback, Anirudh, could we begin with you, since this is an area that you have done a lot of work and you've been involved in the litigation? It's just interesting, I guess, to begin with you. Sorry.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. So just a little bit of help here. What was there a specific problem statement that was given to the teams, or was it generally the ask was to create a presentation on the like broadly what the state of affairs is at this point?
So the problem statement was to avoid going too descriptive and to start looking at it independently and thinking about the why of regulation and whether inductively they could create a framework, and then of course come back to the current state of affairs and see if that's matching with what they would consider an ideal regulatory framework.
Sure. Okay. So one thing I felt that maybe it would have been um, in our description of what blockchain is, maybe one could have one could have simplified the concept a lot more. Now, obviously, this is always a function of when you're making a presentation like this, it's a function of who the audience is and how familiar the audience is with the subject. But very typically, we've seen that when it comes to discussions around such emerging complex technology, it is always good to start with an assumption that people do not fully understand. Even if they do, I think your nuanced understanding could be slightly different from somebody else's. So it's always helpful to start from kind of just breaking down things very, very simply. And a good test that I like to apply is, will this explanation work for a 10-year-old? There's really nothing that you cannot break down for a 10-year-old if you try hard enough. And until you can get to it, I think you've not simplified it enough, or you've also not understood it completely. So that's just one. I mean, there's not criticism really. I mean, I think it's something that we always struggle with, no matter who the audience is. We've seen that it helps to kind of break down these concepts. So that was one. Second is, I think, what is the potential of blockchain itself? We didn't cover that in too much detail. Maybe that was a function of time, and the problem statement was more about regulatory approaches, etc. But I think these are interconnected as well, because if you contextualize your concerns, your regulatory risks, etc., vis-a-vis its potential and promise, that discussion may be more helpful. Generally, I think the team did a fairly good job. I mean, I don't know how much time you had to do this, but you did cover a fair bit of ground as such. Um, couple of specific things that we went over, like for example, treating cryptocurrencies as security. I can't disagree with that necessarily, but I would also say that there's a fair amount of debate and nuance to that. Whether do we treat it as security, as an asset, as software, maybe a hybrid. And I didn't see the team going into, you came to us with a conclusion, but why so? Also, there's so much regulatory precedence to this, right? Different countries have chosen to, many more countries have chosen to regulate it not as securities, but rather as asset than a security. So I just wonder if you went into that kind of detail in your research, and it would have been nice to, at least, even if you didn't have the time to really argue it out at length, maybe just bringing it out, flagging it out would have been good. Because a sophisticated audience, for example, would like to see that you engage with it, right? I mean, as long as I can trust your assessment, that you've gone into that, you understand what you're saying, I think I'm more comfortable going with your conclusion. So that was one bit. There was a mention about crypto currencies, an effort to reduce volatility by having a reserve with the RBI. See, I think the one basic challenge with any of these suggestions is that cryptocurrencies, by definition, as a concept, are global in nature, right? So it's the same Bitcoin that I kind of buy, sell. The way it functions is the same across geographies, and it's very hard to customize and localize this. So can I really have a reserve, for India, but there's a completely different functionality or at the back end in other countries? May not be possible. So I just wonder if you kind of thought of it from that perspective. I did not follow the point about hybrid digital currency, where a portion you said cannot be converted to hard cash. Um, uh, I, I think that's an interesting suggestion. If I understood you correctly, what you're saying is, well, it can be fungible with other cryptocurrencies, but not into hard cash. So the suggestion is interesting. I think it will put a lot of regulators at ease, but really, I mean, that is what actually funds the whole economy as well, right? I mean, the reason why people invest into it, which then ultimately leads to which funds the development of the technology, is because there is fungibility with hard cash. I mean, I think interesting suggestion, but I would have loved to maybe hear just a little bit more. And even if you don't have solutions to everything, I think raising the right questions and stopping there is also not a problem, not bad, because there are many questions that need to be answered to which there are no complete solutions. But it gives your audience, in this case, more comfort that you have dealt with everything, and I mean, you've thought about this comprehensively. So that's about it. But I think it's a good job. It's a very tough, complex issue as a whole, and I think you did a good job.
Thanks, Anirudh. I mean, I think that was very extensive and invaluable feedback. And I think not only to the cryptocurrency group, I think it's something that applies to any group that's sort of presenting on any subject that, like you said, needs to be explained with the assumption that your audience is a 10-year-old. And there are, as we have seen during the course of today's discussion, many such areas where you are effectively speaking to 10-year-olds. Astha, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I can. I don't have much to add after Anirudh's comprehensive comments. Sorry, my camera. But I think that the sort of incentives for the government to move from the ban to actually regulating, like that, I think needs to be clarified. It would be interesting to see also some kind of market sizing. I think I always find that to be a convincing sort of plot line in terms of what it really means to be to go down one path versus another. And I think that level of clarity would be interesting. And I think, again, like I'm duty bound to say that I think that a certain impact assessment on what it really means for the community or society in general, where it might be helpful, what are the sort of social gives of crypto, are also important to reflect. Like I said, I think that we often miss that out in some ways. So I think that is another area that I would probe in to make a broader case for regulating it as opposed to banning it. And I think that this, sort of quote unquote incentive for the government is important to chart out, which I don't think is entirely clear.
Rahul?
Sure. I mean, the industry aspect isn't very heavy in the presentation, of course, because they're focused on regulation. But a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share is, part of regulation can also be limit which cryptocurrencies show up first, right? So they had the sandbox environment, the suggestion RBI, but you don't have to start with all of them, right? Number one in the world, BTC, but number two, Ethereum is actually more of a token utilized for technology innovation. It's not actually a tradable currency, right? The only tradable currency is actually Bitcoin, right? And the way it's used. So maybe a little more focus on that, because the currencies were not given some detailed exposure in the presentation, and the thoughts around which one should SEBI, because SEBI should not regulate Ethereum. That's very different, as I said, right? Even though it has the second largest market cap. So thoughts around exactly focusing on the cryptocurrency list, limiting and starting with a slow amount. And also, they did talk about innovation in that, sort of hurdles that it would affect if it never got regulated to that aspect. But the reality is that it also enables or benefits a lot of businesses and, like Asta was saying, the citizens. So even that sort of slide on what benefits there are for the citizens, for the businesses when this gets regulated, that being part of the, I think presentation would help anyone understand why. Like I said, why not, right? To that aspect. And the last piece that came to my mind was, see, Bitcoin is very interesting because it can be traded and used in the same day. See, stocks cannot, right? Like I can buy and sell a stock, but then I have to redeem it, and then I take cash out, and the cash can be used for whatever exchange I want to make. But Bitcoin in reality is, 24 hours, as cross-border, like Anirudh said, and can be used at that very second for something, right? So it has everything built into it. So that understanding changes the entire aspect of how that can be regulated. It's not the same. That's why SEBI, great. I'm all for RBI, SEBI, and all the, the financial regulators in this, but understand that, like, there are so much that you can do with this one coin that you cannot do with a stock or with a mutual fund in entry or an ETF, right? That you can do with this one piece there. So a little bit more on that and how that could flow into regulation would have also been nice. Otherwise, great job. I learned more, I think, than they're learning from me again.
Nice. And Kaushik?
Mute myself. Yeah, I won't hazard a comment with Anirudh around on crypto. Clearly, I don't know even a portion of what he does. But I think the presentation, as Rahul said, was more for me to get to know. And I think that bit was there. The only limited comment that I will have is that maybe, and some bits of that was spoken to by Anirudh and Astha and Rahul also, is if we can have some more real world examples in the setup itself. So for example, one place that I have personally been wanting to read about and try and apply cryptocurrency, and more than cryptocurrency, Bitcoin too, is the whole concept of delivery of common services through the common service centers that the government of India is planning or rolling out and thinking to roll out. I think that kind of context could really add a little more value. But I think given the time and the amount of time that was given to all of them, and I think when I was at law school, I couldn't have made this. So well done, chaps.
Thank you all for the feedback. Asta has a hard stop. I hope we can take a few questions if some of you can be around.
They're on.
Sure, great. So, would you like to just pass around the mics? And yes, we have a question from Inamul.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank all of you here. I mean, it was a brilliant discussion. Honestly, I'm unable to express how much I thoroughly enjoyed the panel discussion. Special thanks to the Dean and the team for inviting all the panelists over here. Uh, I have two questions. The first question is, in the recent past, like we've seen a lot many manias happening, like the Bitcoin mania, the Dogecoin mania, and the GameStop mania, and all these manias happening. I'm trying to understand that, like something as a random chat on a forum can rock political centers and financial centers of the world. Uh, is this a tale of something much more bigger and consequentialist in nature? And second of all, with regards to cryptocurrencies, I wanted to understand that since conventional currency is based on trust, and something like cryptocurrency is based on trustless technology, uh, wherein in this case, in recent past, information scholars have actually like mentioned that a Bitcoin does not guarantee privacy or anonymity, because anyone with a blockchain copy can actually like trace back your Bitcoin transactions till the end. Uh, so my question, specific question over here, that since in the blockchain technology, crypto proof is given a pedestal over trust, do you think that we are sleepwalking into an age where the social fabric of a country is I mean, social fabric of the world is basically being damaged to a very good extent? Thank you.
Okay. Kaushik, if I could direct the first question to you, I mean, because the virality of content, I think, is what, in some sense, Inamul is hinting at.
No, so I think this is interesting. So the good part is that people are thinking about the fact that it is all that is there is content. There is nothing else, right? Whether it's currency, it's coin, it's your film or television. So I'd like to ask him back. How does he think? How does he think any kind of regulation can really control or regulate this? How? Before I start answering that question.
My question was more on like how people are behaving out there in the social sphere,
That is
the online
exactly.
sphere. So that was my
No,
angle.
no. So I understand that. So the point to that is, and if you, there was a point that I tried to make briefly when I was talking about it, is that all that there is to regulation, really, and self-regulation specifically, is the adherence to community guidelines, not only given by platforms, but by people who are creating content on those platforms. Each of us need to understand very, very clearly what the consequences of our actions are, and that if we really talk to a very specific thing like micro blogging, right, the standard answer that any micro blogging platform will give you is that there is no time gap between what you type on your device and it being posted. It really puts a massive amount of uh, responsibility on the user in that sense, to be very, very careful of what he or she is writing, and that much more onto, say, an influencer or somebody of repute of in any form or fashion. I mean, let's read the Consumer Protection Act and what it lays down vis-a-vis celebrity endorsements today. It is, that would be my answer to it. I mean, there is no law or regulation that can ever do it. It is the fact that we are working and moving towards a mature user base. And when I say a mature user base, I do not mean an educated user base. The whole idea of anything on the internet is that if you don't need to speak a particular language or be educated in a say a Daksha fellowship to be able to access that. And that's what, but the responsibility of acting responsibly transcends. You still have to do it. It's something that it's something that Rahul does when he makes a game. Before that game is actually rolled out, there are betas and there's testings and etc. that happens to ensure that the likelihood of it being misused is uh, reduced. Similarly, when we post something, when we use the internet or anything like that, we must remember that what we say and truth in that person, in that context, becomes a matter of perspective. And when you tweet, when you write something on Facebook, when you share a video, that particular video necessarily runs the risk of being perceived in not the way in which you posted it. So I think that's my answer to your question, Anant, and to you. I can really go on about this, but I think let's just hard stop on this right now because I need to get out and go on to a call. So I'm going to move out of this thing. Thank you very much. I'll take all the questions offline, and I'm happy to have another conversation about this. But I need to get onto a call now.
Thank you. Thank
Sorry.
you, Kaushik.
Sorry,
Thanks.
guys. Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Anirudh, and thank you all of you there. It's Valentine's Day. End this fast. Go for a date.
Is that what you're doing, Kaushik?
No, I am actually getting onto a phone call, which is not a date. Bye-bye.
Sure.
See you.
Thanks. Bye. So, Anirudh, can you take the second part of this question? I did not fully get the question. I mean, there were some elements of trust, trustless, and also questions around privacy and anonymity. So I didn't fully get it. But if you did, or if you want a clarification, we can ask Inamul to clarify too.
Before that, I would just like to make a comment on question number one, which is that the GameStop mania, so to say, was many months in the making, right? We've just begun to talk about it now. It's gone crazy now, but it was many months into the making. So this one kind of retail investor who tweeted and pointed out that there is a lot of value in the stock which has not been recognized today by the market, which ultimately got other investors' attention and who started to pump in money into the stock, and that ultimately gradually started to build up, right? I think that, on the contrary, gives me a lot of faith in the market because there was somebody spotted that value, and it was an individual, not an institution, and the power of that individual's ability to then kind of bring out that, extract that value gives me some faith in the market as well. Now that's just one aspect of it. There are many other things which have happened in due course, which are obviously raising larger questions about how our markets are governed, etc. For sure. But I mean, these are lessons that we learn, and then we kind of evolve, improve on our regulatory approaches. I think that's just the way things are. On question two, yes, I did not follow the question entirely, but I think I have a sense, and correct me if I got it all wrong. I think there's some confusion between the fact that you call the blockchain a trustless system. Does that kind of is that what is causing you some discomfort? That there is an inherent need for trust. Well, the whole, this is more of a philosophical point, that it's not that there is. So the whole idea of blockchain and disintermediation here is that you do not. You typically always need an intermediary because you need somebody you can trust. When two parties are transacting with each other and they don't know each other, how do they do that transaction, right? So if you have, for example, if I were to take an example from the financial system, Bank of China and Bank of India are doing a transaction, and an individual is doing a transaction from one bank, transferring money from one to the other. But back in the day, they did not know each other, right? So on either side, you need a third party who can help you do that transaction, just like you need a broker for a real estate transaction, right? That connects these two parties. So there came in, say a MasterCard or a Visa or other technology providers who basically built relationships at either end. So Bank of India trusted this third party, and they said, all right, as long as I know you are in the equation, I can go with you, right? And this person then would go to Bank of China and say, listen, you know me, you trust me. Let's do this trade with Bank of India, right? You don't have to worry about each other. You know me, and that should be enough. Now, that is where there's an inherent requirement, a need for trust in any kind of transaction. What blockchain does is, it basically says that, well, my technology takes away the need for trust. It no longer matters whether you know each other or not, right? Because this is a tamper-proof record, you can trust the information that has been handed over to you. So if somebody says like, I have transferred 10 rupees to your account, you can trust that information. So you now don't need a third party to trust. And that's why we call it trustless, because there's no need for trust. you're going to need a third party to create that trust, right? That's kind of the philosophical concept here. And I don't think it goes to anything that you mentioned, which is, I mean, kind of something that concerns me about the larger societal fabric or whatever. I mean, it's just that you're going to need an intermediary. That's all that it means. But I'm not sure if does that answer your question, or did I go on some tangent?
Yes, I second your answer, but my question was on the realm that that we have entered an age of algorithmic thinking. That as you said, that I mean the GameStop mania gives you, I mean, belief in the market. I mean, on the other end, we could also understand as to how we've become like carbon copies of each other. I mean, my question was more on the lines in the sense that like how it's a trustless technology and there's no need of trust, and that technologies per se have an effect on the humans as a whole. I mean, do you think like this technology of blockchain, which is exponentially going to increase, is going to have an effect on like how humans are going to like interact with each other?
I mean, surely it's going to have change the way we do a lot of things together. But I'm not sure if uh, I mean, I fully appreciate, fully understand the question as such. So I mean, pardon me there, but
Maybe we can also kind of get him to write it down and then reach out to you. Any last questions, because we are really now past time and I do not want to detain our panelists any longer. But any last questions we can.
And there's just one question which is on the forms. Should I, because there are no more questions in the class. Okay, Inamul, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is directed to Mr. Rahul. So you've been into like innovation and making games and all of that. Since you've seen that side of the world, uh, how 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 much do you think that like the the distinction between the tool maker and the tool is getting blurred like day by day? Do you see it getting blurred, and how do you perceive this?
Sure, you're very philosophical, by the way. I think every creator melds into their tool, honestly, and the process itself is one of flow. So when you're coding, if you've ever done this, it's very deep, right? You just flow and your hands start typing and you go off. You don't know where time is going. This is true for all creators. You lose sense of time. So the blurriness is not new today, by the way. It's been there since when you're painting and you're in art, or when you're playing a sport and you lose yourself in the sport because you're so focused on where the ball is going or something to that effect. Same thing when you're creating today with games and stuff. So our tools are always the one way for us to escape. Maybe partially why we do this, right? We enjoy creating something that we feel is consistently giving us this mental benefit of being in flow, and the content we create, hopefully people like it, and then if they don't, we go and we create another one. But the blend, of course, has been there for a long time.
Thank you both. I mean, I think this has been a fantastic conversation, and we've really looked into so many different aspects of regulation. Not only emerging tech, I think the larger questions around the political economy that we have become, the kind of relationships that exist between the legislature, executive, and the judiciary, and all of it, of course, contextualized to what's happening with emerging technologies. With this, I would like to end the Daksha Conclave as well, formally, because this was the concluding panel. Hope to see both of you engaged with the fellowship as we go along this journey, not only for this cohort, but for subsequent cohorts as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for clapping, everyone. So virtual.
It's good to hear, yeah, claps
Thanks
from real people.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Anil.